Welcome to Reddit Aliens. People who explore abandoned places. What is the creepiest or strangest thing you found inside? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Had a creepy abandoned house in my neighborhood. It was totally normal as kids to go in, check out the expired eggs and milk among other things in the fridge. The house was absolutely trashed, but it was if nothing was ever taken, so it was full of shit. My parents also spent time in there and came across a folder of news clippings and notes from interviews the owner of the house had with police about local unsolved murders. As far as we know, the case is still unsolved, and the owner of the house hasn't been seen in over a decade now. My mom has submitted everything to the police. A tower at a factory, climbed it and found a laminated sheet of paper with a poem inside. Don't remember exactly what it said, but it was about watching a sunset. It was on the handrail under a rock, so I just read it and left it. I remember feeling happy. Through the poem was sad. I was happy because someone had left it there as a piece of their mind, and only the brave would get the chance to climb and read it. Sounds like you might have stumbled across a really cool geocache or something like that. Does anybody still do that? My grandfather is a realtor, and he told us about a hoarder's house that they had abandoned. Rural Alabama. We got to see it, walk around in it, and it was truly indescribable. A 50-plus-year-old tree growing through their pool in the backyard, floors caved in from the sheer weight of all the crap, etc. We had trouble breathing after being inside. It was horrible. The worst image I'll never get out of my head was a small kennel outside, with 2 or 3 small, think Italian greyhound, maybe just puppies, dog skeletons. They still had shock collars around their necks in a curled up sleeping position. I hope those people rot in hell if they made those poor things suffer. Me and my friend used to explore construction sites all the time in high school. One time, we went to this half-built huge concrete building at 2 a.m., which I think became a spa. There was so much mud around it that we almost lost shoes trying to walk through it. So instead, we got 2 big 4x4 wood posts they had on site and would balance on one and then grab the one behind and place it in front of us. After literally an hour of this and falling a lot, we got to the building and there were almost these little hot tub looking areas. It was super spacious and there was this ladder going to the 2nd story. We all of a sudden heard a bunch of steps up there and we freaked out, but literally everywhere we went, we were always scared of there being some homeless attacking us or something like that. So we decided to tough it out and try to ignore out of fear. Then came the long debate of who would go up the ladder first. Neither of us wanted to go up first or last. Both seemed equally terrifying. Please don't come up. Literally almost shat my pants, but no one would have known. Because as we were sprinting out the mud, we had just slowly meandered across this bog, and now we were slipping and tripping through it. TL, DR, construction site. Some squatter upstairs said, "Don't come up." We overreacted, but still creepy in the situation. There's a house about a block away from mine that looks identical to the one from Monster House. Very old house with small gargoyle statues by the steps. Basically, every kid in the neighborhood has broken in to look around at least once. My older brother and his friend did, and he told me stories of the house as a kid. So one day, when I had 5 or 6 friends over, we decided to check it out for ourselves. Unfortunately, my story isn't anything insane because we had to rush out of there, but there were 2 things that stood out as extremely bizarre. First, there was a toilet that was fully functional and positioned in the middle of the living room. Guess the homeowner didn't like having to get up and walk to the bathroom. And second, there was an upstairs with no way to get to it. No stairs, no opening where the stairs used to be, and no obvious temporary patch to block off the upstairs for any reason. There just appears to never have really been a way to get up there, but it makes no sense. I went with a group of friends to go to an old textile mill. When we got near the roof, one of my friends nearly fell through the floor. Some of the wooden boards had rotted out over time and couldn't support his weight. He had fallen, he would have easily been in intensive care, if not worse, given where we were. Not anything particularly wild, just a reminder that if you go to an abandoned place, be careful. Many of these places haven't been taken care of for a long time and can be very dangerous. When I was first renting my brother's basement, just off the property was an old railroad station. Since it was a college town, students would sometimes drop off mattresses or couches there. Judging by the decorating, at some point some kids dropped acid and painted eyes and swirls and pyramids with white and yellow paint. While exploring, I found a cardboard box with some school papers, a few snapshots, and some personal items. There was a psych eval, some legal documents about mental health. The last dates were of the middle of the last winter. What I put together was a kid was released from juvenile detention with a cardboard box in the middle of winter, and this old railroad depot was his only place to go. The box was all he had, and he abandoned that too. We were exploring an old veteran cemetery on the outskirts of our town very late one night. We went in there looking for ghosts with high-frequency recording equipment and cameras. It was our first year in college, so we were all about 18 to 19 years old. There were two sections of the cemetery, a much older, larger section, and a section full of thousands of the small, government-provided veteran headstones. The older section was what you would expect in a cemetery: old tombs, unmarked graves, and huge, ancient trees. We parked near the veteran area of the cemetery and proceeded through. Once we entered the older section of the cemetery, we started hearing voices. Of course, we pressed on, thinking they were ghost voices. Nope. Several large thugs were conducting some business deep within the larger, older section of the cemetery. As we approached, they spotted us first and started yelling something to the tune of, "You shouldn't be here," and "You better effing run," all while laughing like they were insane. They proceeded to run after us. We raced through the cemetery and hid behind some tombstones while we listened to their footsteps running around the cemetery looking for us. That was the scariest part, waiting to be found in the dark. Then the cops showed up. Apparently, someone had seen all the activity. The thugs went quiet and took off back towards the old part of the cemetery, presumably to get what they had left down there where the cops were headed. While the cops and thugs headed down to the deeper, darker area of the cemetery, we bolted to the car. That was the last time we went ghost hunting in a cemetery. I mean, I know in our youth we want to look for places to go neck and canoodle, but it's gotta be better than like some abandoned, creepy-looking house. Right? About 15 years ago, my boyfriend and I were looking for a spot to fool around, so we went to a nearby construction site. We noticed the road kept going past the construction site into the woods, so we followed the road, and there was an abandoned house at the end of it. The next day, I went back in the daylight with a buddy, and we saw that there was a second abandoned house further back. That first house was easy to get into and had nothing particularly interesting in it. The second house was boarded up. I'll call my buddy Jill. Jill and I finally managed to break some boards on the back window. Then we used the broken boards to break the window. We crawled in the window. Once we got in, we pushed a chair up to the windowsill we'd come in from so we could get out without cutting ourselves. Then we turned around and saw that the walls were covered with spray paint saying things like, "Kill yourself," and "They're coming," and "Die." We assumed other teenagers had done it. The kitchen had tons of smashed dishes. The furniture in the house looked like an axe had been taken to most of it. Then we came to a room with an extremely detailed map of our town drawn on the walls. It looked like it was from the 70s due to certain labels on stores. The map had people's names of houses and the words "good" or "bad" after them. After that room, we decided to head out. We walked back into the living room, and behind the chair we had pushed up to the window, the wall now had spray paint saying, "Get out of my house," which was definitely not there when we had pushed the chair there at the beginning. I ripped my pants on the window, I was so terrified, while trying to get the F out of there. I've been exploring abandoned buildings for a while, mostly hospitals, malls, nursing homes, etc. I know other people have had way scarier moments than me, but I recall I was exploring an abandoned nursing home by myself. Now, this is a place I've been to several times before. Now, to set the stage, it's a windy fall day. The wind is howling through the open doors and windows in the building. The building is creaking, leaves are blowing around outside below the dark gray clouds above. Basically, any Stephen King movie, especially since this also was in Maine. As I'm standing in one of the rooms taking photos, listening to the wind, I swear I heard voices coming from the other end of the building. Not other people, but like your classic whisper of a voice that somehow came from far away. I ended up getting out of there pretty quick and haven't gone back since. The weirdest thing I ever found was a satanic ritual site in the middle of a college campus. Over the years, a couple of buildings had been built and rebuilt into the same spot, leaving space between them. The entrance to the area between them was an alley, was only a few feet across, with a large bush covering it. You wouldn't notice the gap unless you were looking up, which I often did on my nightly walks, looking for service ladders up to the rooftops. I went to check it out one night. The alley opened up into a small courtyard, and there was a small building for the AC or elevator hydraulics, with a ladder on the side. I climbed to that to peep in all the windows facing the alley. All offices, no lights, no chance of being spotted this late at night, so I hopped down and explored. Behind the small building was an even skinnier space, pitch black from the shadows cast by the 3-story brick walls surrounding it. Since I was finally sure nobody would spot me, I could get out my flashlight and explore. Rounding the corner, I stopped in my tracks. There were black candles scattered everywhere, but mostly clustered at the end of the alley. Following my flashlight up from there, I saw a large, complicated pentagram drawn in red. Sigils were drawn in the same red on all the walls, with soot stains crawling up over them from the black candles. Not gonna lie, I skedaddled. But not because of the sigils. I knew they were drawn in paint, not blood. If they were blood, they'd have turned brown and washed off the walls with rain over time. It was the sight of the soot, recent enough to not have been washed off, and heavy enough to suggest lots of use, that sent me packing. I don't like sticking around when someone might show up, especially in a dead-end alley nobody knows about. I returned during the daylight to check out some more. No stains on the concrete. Found a small bit of burnt sage, though I didn't know what it was back then. You had to pass through some mud to get to the alley, and I found some really old, almost non-existent shoe prints. Looked like combat boots, large lugs with no fancy pattern, in a small, probably woman's size. I checked back periodically, but always in the daytime. No more footprints, and the soot had faded a bit. I eventually snuck a grill in there and made it one of my study nooks. I found a half-built hotel on a tiny island in the Philippines that the investors had clearly just run out of money and left, so there were uninstalled toilets and half-installed furniture everywhere. I climbed up a few floors to see what else was there and went into a room and found about 15 monkeys, all just frozen, staring at me, as if I'd interrupted their meeting. The look the main monkey gave me is burned into my memory years later, as it was TG most threatening, aggressive look an animal has ever given me. I found a broken noose in the attic at an abandoned house. It looked like it was ripped, not cleanly cut. Also found what looked to be a suicide note in what I assume was the kitchen. Whole floor caved into the basement below it. Whether this was someone playing a joke or not, I'll never know. Never found any info on the place, and since it's been torn down, this was like 11 to 12 years ago. I wish I still had the photos of the noose. In recent years, I'd have to say the time my friend and I were going to an abandoned asylum. We made our way through the woods, and I was telling her how the last time I was there, I saw security back at the building we were about to pop out at, and if we see a white truck, to just run and hide. Right then she goes, "Oh, F, there's a truck right there." But it was a red truck, not white. No traffic is permitted on the road the asylum buildings are on except security. You can't even get past the gate unless you work at the nearby building still in use. With nowhere to run or hide, we just came out of the woods and were in the little woodless area just before we got to the first building. We ducked down to the grass and covered our heads as if that would somehow hide us. I'm staring at the truck, hoping I could will it to leave. And it backs up. I think, okay, sweet. And it stops again, and the engine shuts off. Passengers get out, looks at us, turns back, and gets something out of the truck, then throws it into the air. It's a goddamn hawk. This guy had a hawk. I looked at my friend, and we're both so confused. The guy turns to us and asks if everything's okay. We stay silent as we're so confused. He again asks if we're okay, and my friend sits up and goes, "Yeah," and he just shrugs. The hawk lands back on his arm. He gets in the car, and they leave. We just look at each other like, what the actual F? We later saw them driving around the asylum still. I told this story on here before, and someone mentioned something about a bird training place not too far away, so it was probably someone from there. I don't remember exactly what they said, but it was still really effing weird, especially considering no one's allowed on those roads, and the part he was on, only security is allowed on. There was an old abandoned factory right behind my grandpa's house when I was growing up. It had no roof, the windows were broken, and weeds were growing up all around it. We used to drive our go-karts around it or use it as a target when shooting our BB guns, but I got bored one day and decided to actually go inside. It's not like it was locked either. Broken windows and no roof, so access was easy. I went in and found a bunch of old machines still there but rusted. An old office on the top floor with file cabinets and a used-to-be nice desk. I believe it was an old box factory. Anyway, I found broken beer bottles, used needles, liquor bottles, etc. People had partied there at some point, most likely before I lived with my grandma, as we had never seen or heard anyone out there, and it was right by her house. One part of the building had collapsed entirely, and plants were growing in that section. In the plants, there were several different animals: possums, cats, raccoons, lizards, etc. It was pretty cool, until I saw one of the possums carrying a used condom, so not scary, but definitely weird for 9 to 10-year-old me. There is an old Quaker cemetery in the middle of a park in New York. It is basically abandoned and has a 9-foot fence all around the perimeter. My friends and I decided to climb into the cemetery using a large tree branch that overhung the fence, then dropped down into the cemetery. We gathered up a bunch of beer and smokables and went in. We were partying for an hour or so when one of the guys said, "Look at those dogs looking at us." About 100 yards away were 6 or 7 big dogs eyeballing us. Slowly at first, we got up and walked towards where we came in. Then somebody ran, and it was on. The dogs were after us. One by one, we had to climb the fence, grab the branch up over. The last image I had of them was of them working through very tall grass to find us. We just made it, and they barked at us from their side of the fence. Never went back. When I was 9, me and my older brother, who was 13 at the time, would go to Sean's house, who was this nice 30-year-old man that lived in the house down the street behind our house. I used to live in Detroit, so the houses are pretty old and separated by alleys. That would play basketball with us and would casually say hi. Nothing weird about the guy. Well, all of a sudden he left or died. We don't really know what happened to him, but his house stayed vacant for years. So one day my brother and I decided to break into his house. The house had all wood furniture, wooden toys with papers on desks and dishes in the cabinets, a pretty well-kept house. My brother decided to check the upstairs, and while I checked the kitchen, in the kitchen, I found a wooden stool in the middle of the kitchen with 4 books on top of it and a rope hanging down from the fan. No noose, no nothing. But I think about this all the time. What the hell happened to Sean? I can understand why you didn't take it, but I don't know, I think I would have definitely taken it. What would you have done? Not really scary, but one of the weirdest, unexpected things I've seen for sure. There was this hostel not far from my boyfriend's house that was so poorly built it was practically sinking into the ground. So it was deemed unsafe for people to reside in, and the owners decided to rebuild it in another place. Around a month after it was abandoned, me and boyfriend were taking a walk around the neighborhood and decided to check out whatever's inside. It was pretty boring. They took out all the furniture and doors, and it was just wallpaper and bare floor. All was still pretty clean. However, upon entering the hallway, we saw something on the floor in the middle of the path. It was a teddy bear, almost brand new, and it was holding a little pouch. I took a closer look, and inside the pouch was an SD card, inserted into an adapter. I was really curious about what could be on the SD, but we agreed that maybe we would sleep better if we didn't know, so we left it there. Nothing interesting besides that, so we left, and shortly after that, the building was demolished. Well, I've always wanted to visit an abandoned place and finally done so around 6 months ago. Some context you'll need. Me and my friend are quite good at parkour and have been looking for an abandoned place to go to for a while. However, the nearest place to us was a supposedly haunted place. We both don't believe in that kind of stuff and pick a date to go there. Well, then the day comes and we both get there. It's a very cool abandoned hospital which was usually boarded up and with fences around, but me and my friend hopped the fence, and it wasn't such a big one, and managed to find a hole to sneak in through. From the beginning, we could both see some very weird stuff like red on the floor, but thought nothing of it. Then we came across this weird room that only had a chair in the middle, surrounded by a circle in red on the floor. Me and my friend started to feel like something was going on there. Then we walk upstairs where the psychological wards were and literally heard banging on doors and footsteps, so we hid in one of the maintenance closets. Then the noises stopped after around 30 seconds, and we got up thinking that it was just our imagination and we were hallucinating. We decided to leave and sneak back out. Well, we arrived at the spot we entered just to see the holes in the boarding wasn't there. We couldn't get out. At this point, I was almost screaming to my friend to get the F out of there. We ran upstairs again to find a broken window, which we jumped out from, then ran over to the fence and jumped it. As we got out, and were both laughing at how much adrenaline must have pumped through our bodies, like 4 people jumped out of the same window and started running towards the fence screaming. Me and my friend got in his car and drove off like as fast as we could. I've never been to any more abandoned places since, and I'm not willing to go. TLDR. Me and a friend go to abandoned hospital. Weird noises and experiences creep us out, decide to leave, and we're chased by angry, creepy people.